All right. Well, Prag, thank you for joining me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great and pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to first start off and understand your background a little bit more. Can you talk about what has inspired your career path?
Oh, absolutely. So my background is not very different from what you generally see in the Silicon Valley. I come from a computer engineering background and have been in the San Francisco Bay Area since the late 90s. I primarily worked in technology companies, various technology leadership roles. My prior two companies were Nutanix and Juniper Networks. Um, for me, I've always been very passionate about solving business problems with technology, and that has always been my the driver for my career path, the decisions that I have made, where to work, what to do, and so on. So prior to Simpplr, I spent 8+ years at a company called Nutanix. That's in the hybrid cloud infrastructure space. I joined them when they were around 250 people, left when they had grown almost 20x. Hoping to do the same at Simpplr.
Yeah, that'd be great. The company is growing really fast. Can you tell me about your current role at Simpler? Just talk a little about what you do as the Chief Technology Officer.
Yeah, so when you think about a CTO role, it can be a little different based on the type of the company and the size of the company. At a high level, either a CTO is very focused on the technology roadmap, innovation, emerging technologies, or in certain companies that usually happens in really large companies. But in fast-growing companies like Simpler, the CTO's role cannot be is not just technology, roadmap, and innovation, but it's also actually getting stuff done. Right? It's the actual execution, product delivery, and so on. And that's exactly what it is for me here. I have the overall responsibility for all of technology. So right from what tools and what technology and where do we want to go in terms of the technology roadmap, I do that. But in addition to that, the larger responsibility is also getting the product out of the door. So the execution, the releases, all of that is part of my portfolio at Simpler. And in addition to that, I also have responsibility for the IT and the core business applications, at least short term. Just because at the speed that we are growing, that currently sits under the engineering organization.
And for those of our listeners who may not be familiar with Simpler, I mean, I know I can describe it, but describe what Simpler does. You said you like to work for companies that solve business problems. What does Simpler do?
So Simpler's original claim to fame was an intranet platform. Simpler is the leader in the internet platform space. We are the best ranked intranet company by Forrester. Um, but that has been the original piece. Over the last few months, few quarters, we have really started moving into a space where we can drive overall employee experience platform, employee engagement, and so on. We recently rolled out capabilities like surveys, newsletters, which are part of the larger employee communication. But what's really unique about Simpler and where we are going, and I know we'll talk about this more, is that the underlying data that we have as a part of our intranet platform, all the tools that we are rolling out, can really give us great real-time insights into employee experience. And that's really where we are going. We call that live EX. So it is not just about passive reactive communication, but it's about really getting real time, proactive, predictive insights into the overall employee engagement and employee experience. So we are really an employee experience platform.
That's where the live employee experience comes in.
That's exactly what it is. It's live EX in terms of getting real predictive insights, right? And getting them immediately.
Right. I want to dig into that quite a bit more. That's a nice overview. So let's move into our first segment called Story Time.
Welcome to Story Time. Story Time. Story
Let
Time.
me tell you a story.
So you just mentioned the new functionality, the new offering is called Live EX, right? And it's described as an employee communication software, employee communication platform with that experience management component. Talk about how this is different than a lot of the offerings in the field.
So the traditional offerings in the field are much more, how should I call it, reactive, or see, normally what most companies will do is they will communicate, then they will wait. They will not necessarily know whether that communication has been received right. Maybe down the line, few weeks later, few months later, they would do a survey. Some people will respond to the survey, and this will go on. It's a very slow process. What is different in terms of live EX is the live word, right? It's about being real time. The fact that our platform allows communication and then can get real time feedback on that communication is huge, because not only does that allow you to double down on communication if it's going right, but it also allows you to course correct. Right? I think of an example where, let's say, a company just came out with their earnings result. Now, this is that earning result may be great, it may not be great, but how do you know what the mood of the company was as a part of that earning result? Are people excited? Has the morale improved, or are people concerned? How can you get real time feedback? Our platform very easily can allow not only the initial communication of that earning result, right? Whether it's using our native video capabilities, it's using our feeds. Uh, it can also do impulse, real time checks to get feedback on, what are the employees feeling now? Did they like the result? Did you not like the result? And I just gave you an example of an earning result, but this could be anything. It could be an important initiative. It could be, maybe an M&A, all kinds of things. Just getting that real time feedback is huge. On top of that, the fact that our platform includes not just the communication piece, but it also includes the listening piece. We also have very rich analytics that can help all levels of management, right from the manager all the way to the CEO of the company, to really understand trends. And so that they can, really take action and course correct and do things based on that. So that's really what's different at Simpplr compared to most traditional platforms, which are, okay, you send a survey, wait for a response, consolidate it, and all of that takes a long time to do.
Yeah, I feel like this is filling sort of a dual role, right? Because this is something that I've struggled with in my many roles in internal communication, is like that measuring piece, right? Traditional engagement, you do wait for those annual or biannual engagement surveys to see if people, do you understand the question? Do you understand how this big initiative fits into the corporate strategy? But we wouldn't know for 6 months to a year. And that's really too little, too late when you're trying to move the needle, immediately, because these initiatives move fast. But at the same time, you've got people now being dispersed. The workforce is all over the place, and sort of gone are the days when IC could get it sort of that feel, that understanding. How do people, really think about this, and how are they feeling about it? That idea of like a canary in a coal mine, right? Because now I can't really go to an office and understand, how people are feeling about it. So it feels as if, and on top of that, then I'm telling a story usually from open rates, right? Page views. And I've always thought that doesn't give much insight, because I know I'm a person who will open an email just to make it read, right? Opened and it's gone. It feels as if this is doing it a little bit different. This idea of real-time analytics, sentiment check. Can you just talk about how that works, like what it looks like? Help our listeners understand, how are you getting those nuggets of information? Because even if someone does a pulse check quarterly or even monthly, it's not quite the same. So I want to help people understand what that looks like.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. As in, if we think about how much business work has changed in the last, 2+ years, I'll say COVID and the post-COVID world. I don't know whether even we are in the post-COVID world, but in the last 2 years, the connection piece, till what was it, 2019? Folks were going to the office, they were meeting people, you were understanding what's happening, the water cooler conversations were happening. Now, with everybody dispersed, most people working from home, even going forward, I don't see people coming back full time. That connection piece is lost. And what that has led to is this whole, we read about the great resignation or the great reshuffle. So that has been a big challenge. Now, where Simpplr's platform can help is, one, not only communicate clearly, okay, but also, you talked about an example where, oh, you'll just read an email just to mark it as read. But what if after you read a message, the system actually prompts you? Let's say the CEO or somebody, some top executive in the company is driving an initiative or a campaign regarding a specific initiative. They sent out some communication. Now, most people may just look at it and say, "Oh, yeah, sure, I read it." But what if after that communication has been reviewed and read, the system asks some very point questions, very simple, 2 or 3 questions. Oh, did you understand this? Or can we provide you more information? So that's very useful. It's almost like a conversation where people are in the office, somebody has communicated, and people are trying to get clarification. So the system will actually now allow you to do that. Now, once that is asked, you can decide how you want to answer those questions. But now that answer to that question can really lead to a lot of rich data sets, which can drive much more engagement, much more understanding of how the employees are receiving this communication. And you use the word thinking. It's not just what you are seeing directly, but it's also thinking, right? If an employee is not even clicking on something that's important, does that mean that the engagement of that employee has gone down? Is there something we could do here to help? And if you're not even opening it, you're not even answering the question. So there are analytics that are direct, that you can immediately measure, but there are also analytics that you can glean from just the behavior, where you clicked, what did you click. I think that's really the key in terms of how the system can help drive engagement, drive better communication, and help with change initiatives. I think that's the biggest piece for us. That is where Simpler is really focused on in terms of technology.
Yeah, I feel like the internal communications person in me, when I hear that, you can see if people are understanding. You can see if people are even. Well, I mean, in the open rates is one thing, but if people don't understand, let's say that there's a new system going online and they don't know when, and then the internal communication person in me is thinking like, oh, we need to do more. Then it's time to step up to make sure that this change initiative is successful. And that seems
Yeah.
really that's like a really great feature.
Yeah, and I think you talked about sentiment checks, right? So what we are doing within the system is we are also introducing things like sentiment check, sentiment analysis. So based on the words that are used, how you respond, where did you click, how did you rate? There are ways now. Technology has improved so much. There are ways to measure sentiment. It like literally is where do you fall in terms of, if I was color coding it, right? Green is really happy in terms of sentiment. Red is not at all happy. How do we measure that? How do we measure responses based on what you write down as your responses? Can we measure sentiment? Can we look at how your answers? I think a lot of that is already getting built into the system, through which we can drive sentiment checks and so on. See, ultimately it is all about, can we make this a happier workplace? That's what the driver is, right? Is, can we make this a happier workplace by helping measure and then driving corrective action of it?
Yeah. As I've talked to internal comms people, and this whole, back to the office situation, do people want to go back? Do people want to stay home or work remotely? And I feel like this is something that comes up where internal comms folks I know will say, well, I know employees don't want to go back, but the leaders aren't listening. This sounds like this would be a great opportunity for internal comms people to have the data to say, see, this is where we are with the sentiment of the employee base, which then might prevent them from leaving and finding a job that is work remote, because they're listening to the employees and what they actually want.
Yeah, and let me add there, as in, it can be different for different people, different for different geographies. So one of the things within Simpler, what we're doing is not just going through and showing this data, but also doing a lot of personalization. You talked about return to office. Just within Simpler, the results that we see from our users are very different. People in, say, in the US may want to just work remote, while employees in India, just because of their personal situation, may want to come to the office. Right? It may be very different, or younger folks may want to come to the office. They may want that social connect. So it's very different. I think what we are doing is not just allowing you to see the data, but personalizing it, where you could communicate based on where you are, what the demographics are, different criteria. So that way, an initiative like return to office could be personalized, the communication for it could be personalized, the reporting for it could be personalized, just based on different criteria. So it is not just, by the way, it's not just the the analytics piece of it, but it's analytics at a very personalized level, That's what the system does.
Can you talk a little bit more about personalization, just so I understand it and our listeners can understand it? Because just talk about how that works in Simpplr.
So let me take an example. Let's take an example of, say, an M&A. Okay? A company is going through an M&A, and the results of that M&A could be that different departments are impacted differently, different geographies are impacted differently. Now, in a traditional sense, if the communication is okay, we are going through an M&A and this is what's happening, it doesn't necessarily capture the right feedback or the right sentiment, because a specific department that's going to benefit by an M&A would feel very different in terms of the sentiment in that department compared to a department which may potentially be impacted in a negative way, right? So what's Simpplr as a communication platform or an employee engagement platform allows you to do is, when you are doing communication, it allows you to cater to all these different criteria and cater communication accordingly. Maybe some groups need more communication, some need less, some need specific kind of communication. All of that is very easily possible in what I call it as a low code no code way, right, wherein you don't need an IT, lot of customization and so on. All of that can be done in a very very easy manner, and then based on that communication, you could uh, easily glean information on, okay, how did people feel, what do they feel. Another example is onboarding. When you're onboarding users, you're doing communication that's different for week one, different for week two, different for month one, and after that, the employee is onboarded, so you no longer need to provide that communication. All of this ability to personalize based on who the employee is, where they are in terms of the employee life cycle, all of that is very easily possible within the system. And that's the first piece of it, which is communicate, and then the listening piece of it to ultimately understand whether you're doing it right, and then accordingly course correcting. So this is all available, out of the box, very little to no customization, as a part of the Simpler EX platform.
So talk a little bit more about the technology that Simpplr is investing in to create this sort of a tech stack that's employing communication and experience tool. We talk about the technology and that Simpplr is investing in.
Sure, and I'll answer it in a slightly different way, or maybe add to it. When we talk about investment, it is the technology component, but it's also the people component, right? Technology has improved so much, specifically in the ML/AI space over the last few years, that lots of algorithms are openly available. You could use a public cloud and so on, but you also need the right people to understand those algorithms. So what we have done, and I've been at Simpler for 4 months now, but we have really doubled down on our investment in the data science space. We hired a chief data scientist at the end of last year. He's an MIT alum, and has done this role at multiple companies, really focused on data science. In addition to that, we are also leveraging the power of public cloud in terms of algorithms, and also, without getting into too much detail, building some proprietary algorithms specifically around sentiment analysis, and engagement analytics, to really drive this. So we were already using most of the newer technology stack and so on. The focus this year has been on the live EX side. Really, how do we take all this data that we have, all the goodness that we have in terms of knowing who is responding, how what are they looking at, and driving, like I keep saying, the predictive piece of it, right? The engagement piece of it. So investments, both not just in terms of technology, but also in terms of the right people and hiring the right people to drive our data science practice.
Yeah, just when I think of intranets, just because I've been around implementing them for a long time, I sort of joke with people about like, people say like, it's not your grandmother's something. Well, this is definitely a different way of thinking about it because, traditionally intranets have been, you go there, there's static content, and it's just, you go there and find a policy and it's written there and that's it. And you just go there when you need a piece of information. So you might go once a week, once a month, but it's not this engagement experience tool that we're hearing about with the Live EX and the Simpplr platform.
Oh, yeah, that's correct. So when you think about traditional intranets, right, you think about almost like a content solution where that has a lot of documents. You hopefully some sort of a search that works. You look up those documents, you see those documents, and that's what an internet is. It's a place to dump a lot of information, and then most of that information is not kept up to date. You don't know which is the latest document and so on. Simpler is completely different to that. It is you wouldn't even recognize it's more like a traditional intranet. It is, think about it this way. I have a 16-year-old daughter. If I show her the traditional intranet, she's going to say, what is this? She has grown up in the age of Instagram and Facebook and feeds. Anything if she wants to do something, first thing she does is a search, right? Uh, that's how Simpler is built. The core piece is a search, a federated search. It has rich native video content. It has a feed. So now you are not even thinking of a traditional internet. It is about content. How do you show that content? How do you interact with the content? How do you ask for feedback on the content in a very almost like a B2C way, right? What you see in the social platforms or social networking platforms and so on. That's how it is. And then if you could do all of that without a lot of IT and engineering help, what I call it as low code, no code, where very easy to implement out of the box, video carousels, feeds, a strong federated search. That's really what Simpler gives in terms of an intranet. And then the whole live EX thing that we are talking about, that's really the cherry on the top, right? Because now you're really using all the data that you have captured and driving predictive analytics.
One of the coolest features is this idea of, well, one of the ones that I hear when I hear people talk about Simpler is how you really can build culture, right? This is such a big buzzword right now with people being dispersed, people coming in, working from home or working remotely. I think it's very interesting how it can build culture and sense of community, in many ways. Part of that is being that social, being able to comment, post videos, images. I post meme, in our instance, or depending on, the topic. How can you use, how do people use Simpler to really get to know one another? I wonder if you can speak to some different components to helping build that sense of community when people are all over the world, the country, the state, wherever people are located. But I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so Simpler, when we started the intranet component of it, right, was the idea was never to just be like a document. Here's a document, here's the search, but it was to drive just the way the product is designed, the user experience for it is like I said, very similar to some of the social tools. So uh, not only is it work focused, finding information, onboarding, and so on, but you can also drive literally like campaigns and initiatives using the tool, and you can drive collaboration using the tool. It's just the way it is. A feed is a very, very important aspect of the tool, which is no different from social, right? You actually see a feed. uh, Recognition, we are in the process of building recognition capabilities, where if somebody does something, then anybody can recognize them. There is you could have badges, gamification, and so on. That's the path we are moving towards. Those are the things we believe truly drive social connection, instead of just finding regular information and so on. So hopefully I was able to answer. I think I would have loved doing a demo. It is so much more easier actually showing some of the social aspects of it compared to just talking about them. But that's where we are going.
Yeah, it really is different to see it and be in it, and if this was visual, it would be fun to see that people can see how people interact. I know, we use Simpler clearly, and just being able to learn about people based on their comments, and then you can have conversations with them about topics, and then, that leads to me to go into Slack and then really just connect one-on-one if that's not, if that's what I want to do. So it does help even me being half the country, half the US away from my company, my coworkers. It gives that opportunity to learn just through the way that they're able to go into the tool and post and comment, which is really cool.
Yeah, and you touched on two important points, right? Slack is very common, with the whole hybrid thing. Teams has become very common. Simpler provides native integrations into that. So not only can you go back and forth between the two, but you could actually post something that goes to Slack and vice versa and so on. So that's another big advantage of using a product like Simpler. All these native integrations that are provided, where not only can you do a lot of things within the system, you can also connect to the ecosystem around Simpler in terms of what's available and so on. What if I'm in Slack, I do a search or I ask a question? Can I just get that information out of Simpler? Absolutely, you can, and vice versa, right? As in, you could do something in Simpler, and you could post it to some of these messaging or communication tools. very easily. So very strong integration framework. And then a large number of our users actually use mobile. They use mobile, and Simpplr has the same native video strong mobile capabilities, because we have customers who have a lot of frontline workers who are, could be truck drivers, or who could be providing health coverage. For them, they don't go to a desktop or a computer to look up things. They are very accustomed to having an app, and that just working with them, available out of the box. I think that's a huge strength of the product.
Yeah, the mobile component, I'm actually starting continue to hear a lot of that. I know I've worked in organizations where a large portion of the employee population wasn't on a desktop and all they had was their phones.
Yeah.
And when you don't have the mobile capability, it really pushes out a big base of the employee population. But even as an internal comms person, right, I've been used to using very different products, for one for newsletter, one to help create videos, one for the intranet. And I think that's a big difference for this for me is it's all one stop, right? So it's all it's all in one place. You can do video in there. You you can do a newsletter, and it's all connected. So it really cuts down on the frustration for using multiple products.
Yeah, it's all the different channels available all together where you could communicate, whether it is static communication using an intranet, newsletters that are going very focused, messaging, whether it is instant messaging, SMS messaging, mobile, email, all kind of built together. You decide how you want to communicate and how do you want to personalize. There are customers who are very mobile dependent, or there are customers who prefer doing newsletters on a quarterly basis. All of that is available as a part of a single ecosystem, and all of that information is then now captured as analytics, which can drive, okay, what's the right mode of channel that's working, what is not working, can you double down on something? So all of that is available, and is widely used by our 500 odd customers.
Yeah. I want to move into our next segment called Ripped from the Headlines.
You hear the news?
Extra, extra, read all about it.
You'd mentioned earlier the Great Resignation. It's now being called, I believe, the Great Reshuffle. How can organizations use Simpplr and Live EX principles to minimize employee turnover and create more emphasis and see results with employee retention?
So I think we touched on this a little bit in some of our other questions. When we talk about the whole employee resignation or the reshuffle, I think the big reason for that, at least I personally believe, the big reason for that is engagement and connection. People just don't feel that engaged, or they are not feeling that connection with the organization. And companies are really looking at ways to improve that. Now, when we talk about engagement and communication, or engagement and connection, the big component of that is communication. Like, how do you communicate? Who do you communicate to? Can you properly explain the why? Can you communicate at the right time? The product really focuses on that communication aspect as the first step of employee engagement or employee experience. Once that communication has happened, the next piece is to actually have a way of listening back to the feedback, which is where surveys, the analytics that I talked about came into play, right? So that is the next piece. So you really understand, okay, if I'm falling short in terms of engagement in certain areas, why is that? What can I do? And then the third component, which is where we are moving towards, is using that to inspire, which is where things like recognition comes into play. If you see certain cultural values being exhibited that will drive more engagement, more connection, then those are the ones that you really want to communicate to the larger group, right? Those are the ones that you want to recognize. So between connection, listening to the feedback for the connection that was provided, and then ultimately inspiring using recognition and various other ways, is how the platform can really help. And we are seeing a great uptick in that, as in we are seeing companies who are looking at employee experience and saying, okay, I really want to invest in my current employees. Hiring a new employee is so much more difficult and so much more money than focusing on the existing employees and keeping them happy, and so on. Like I said, our tagline is make workplace happier, make the workplace better, right? That's really what the whole product is focused towards.
Yeah, and that's been a lot of discussion about this great resignation. People leaving their roles is trying to really focus on their experience. So this is coming at a really great time. I want to move into our last segment called Asking for a Friend.
Just asking for a friend. Hey, asking for a
What are
friend.
some of the tech trends you think will have the greatest impact on employee experience over the next 5 to 10 years?
So with just COVID, there has been a huge change. Like it has been effectively proven now that productivity does not suffer with remote work or hybrid work. This was almost unheard of, right? 3 years ago, most people we used to go to the office. They were in the office for X amount of time. They would sit in the traffic, come back home. That's how it worked. In the initial days, everyone was worried about productivity. But what we saw, and I've seen multiple, surveys and multiple other articles that show productivity has actually in many cases gone up. Now the connection and engagement may have suffered just because people are not meeting each other, but the productivity has gone up. And I see that more and more. This so-called remote work related tools or remote work related systems are really gaining a lot of traction. And Simpler really helps with this whole make it easier to work from home or making easier to work hybrid. One of the things I see just in terms of the business and the technology is that companies have really started to focus on the overall employee experience, and really focus on tools and products that help with that overall employee experience. So I see this trends accelerating over the next few years, where maybe a few years ago, EX may have been something that only few companies looked at, or may have been an afterthought. By EX, I mean employee experience, but that is becoming, front and center for most of the initiatives that companies are looking at. Why not invest and keep current employees happy instead of trying to always look to hire more, right? Because it's already proven that they are the ones who can help with higher productivity and so on. So that I see as the biggest trend. Tools that can help with, or tools or products that can help with remote work, hybrid work, will be where things are going. And then ultimately using, machine learning, AI to drive predictive related behavior, to course correct. That's always been the case. But I think using MLAI and working closely with tools or products that can drive hybrid work, I think is where we are going.
So let me just ask a little follow up to that. A lot of people are set in their ways. Sometimes when you get into companies, you have leaders, they say, hey, this is working. This is the way we've always done it. Whether it be, annual engagement surveys or just these iterative communications that get sent out, right? People are getting something out of the old ways of doing it, and they're probably reluctant to adapt to a tool or new ways of doing it because it has worked in the past. So what would you tell someone who continues to take a more traditional approach to employee experience or employee communications? What would you say to get them to really, focus and pay attention and consider changing?
Let me start with this: is the only constant is change, right? That's how it is always. But I'm a big believer in data. I know it is always there is always resistance to change. People don't want to change. It takes a lot of effort. But if you can prove with data that, okay, if you do X, Y, and Z, your employee engagement is say 50%. But if you do A, B, and C, do things a little differently, I can effectively, clearly prove to you that your employee engagement is going to go up, your attrition is going to go down. That's when it is easier to convince people, right? Otherwise, it is just opinions. The great part about how we have built a product, and how Live EX works is that focus on analytics. Okay, it is very, very easy. You could very easily implement Simpler and say, okay, I'm just going to do it for this one department. I'm going to drive communication using the tool. I'm going to measure the engagement, productivity, all of that, and then compare it with my current method. And then the fact that we are so easy to implement, most of our customers implement our product in like 8 to 10 weeks, which is like unheard of, right, in an enterprise system. So it's very easy. I think for me, the biggest piece, just being an engineer, the biggest piece is I can prove it to you with data, and if I can do that, why would you not want to change? So.
Yeah, I think it's so important. I know as I continue to talk to IC folks across the globe, I believe I can see the value in using data to show the value that internal communications provides. And what this tool does is it gives you sort of hands you the way to show value across your employee base.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's phenomenal. Parag, this has been fantastic. Before I let you go, is there anything you want to talk about that we haven't covered here today?
No, I think we touched on pretty much everything. I think it's been a great, it's been an absolute pleasure having this discussion. Um, Only thing I would say, as a just to end this conversation, is few years ago, internal comms was maybe not a CEO-driven initiative. That's no longer the case. I've talked to so many people where this is now a CEO-driven initiative. CEOs are driving change management. They are the ones worried that if they can't keep their employees engaged, connected, they are the ones who are going to lose their job. So, very important in terms of employee experience, employee engagement. And I would really encourage folks who have not looked at this to give it a real shot and see how they can improve their own overall engagement.
Yeah, the pandemic time has really changed internal communications and how they're seen as very valuable, and it changed the way we view employee experience and the importance that leaders are putting on that. So I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you, Parag, so much. Let our listeners know where they can find you.
I'm on LinkedIn. Just do a search for Parag Kulkarni Simpplr. Hopefully, that's the first first link that you will get. And happy to connect to people. Happy to answer questions that may come up in this space, or for that matter, in any space. Right? As in that I can help with. Uh, Again, great talking to you, Amanda, and this was fun.
Great. Thank you, Parag. Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been great.